I stood trembling, my accounts frozen and payroll due in 48 hours. When I begged my family for help, they just laughed. But just as the judge raised his pen to bankrupt me, the doors burst open, a stranger placed a black-sealed envelope on the bench, and the courtroom screens lit up with my dead grandmother's face. She looked straight at us and asked if we really thought she was blind. My name is Hallie James, and as I sat at the defendant's table, I calculated the probability of my professional death at exactly 100%. The air inside the federal courtroom was recycled and stale, smelling faintly of floor wax and old anxiety. My hands were pressed flat against the cool mahogany of the table, a physical attempt to stop them from trembling. I was a risk analyst, my entire career. The company I had built from nothing was based on predicting disaster, but I had never built a model for this level of betrayal. Across the aisle, the Kensington family sat like a portrait of American nobility. They were the picture of a grieved grace. My brother, Grant Kensington, adjusted his silk tie with a motion so practiced it looked like a tick. He did not look at me. He looked at the judge, his expression one of reluctant duty, as if destroying my life was a chore he simply had to get through before his tea time. Next to him sat my parents. My mother, Eleanor, was dabbing at dry eyes with a linen handkerchief, performing the role of the heartbroken matriarch to perfection. My father, Robert, sat rigid and stone-faced, the stoic patriarch forced to discipline an unruly child. It was a farce, it was a play, and I was the villain they had cast to save their own ratings. The judge, the Honorable Arthur Galloway, looked over his spectacles at the stack of documents my brother's legal team had dumped on his bench just an hour ago. It was an emergency motion for an involuntary bankruptcy and an immediate asset freeze of my company. Blackwater Risk Analytics, Counselor Sterling, the Kensington family attorney, was speaking. His voice was a smooth baritone that filled the room with confident lies. "Your Honor," Sterling said, gesturing toward me with a pitying, open hand, "we take no pleasure in this. The Kensington family has supported Ms. James repeatedly over the years. However, the evidence is irrefutable. Ms. James accepted a personal bridge loan of $2,400,000 from her brother, Grant Kensington, 4 years ago to seed her startup. The terms were clear. Repayment was due in full upon the acquisition of her first federal contract." I felt the blood drain from my face. I opened my mouth to object, to scream that I had never taken a dime from Grant, that I would sooner starve than take their money. But a hand clamped down on my forearm. It was Holly Mercer, my lawyer. Holly was a mystery to me. I had hired her because she was the only one who would take the case on short notice against a firm as powerful as Sterling's. But today she was behaving strangely, while I was vibrating with panic. Holly was terrifyingly still. She wasn't frantically taking notes. She wasn't objecting to Sterling's character assassination. She was just sitting there, checking her wristwatch every 30 seconds. "Don't," Holly whispered, her voice barely audible. "Let him talk. Let him put it all on the record. He is lying." "Holly," I hissed back, keeping my voice low. "That document is a forgery. I never signed a loan agreement. If the judge freezes my accounts, I miss payroll in 48 hours. My staff walks. The federal contract gets voided for instability. Blackwater dies by Friday." "I know," Holly said. She didn't look at me. She was watching the double doors at the back of the courtroom. "Trust the process. Hallie." Sterling was winding up for his finale. "We have provided the court with the promissory note, signed by Ms. James. We have the bank transfer records. We believe Ms. James is attempting to divert funds from her new government contract to offshore accounts rather than repaying her lawful debts. We are asking for an immediate injunction to freeze all assets of Blackwater Risk Analytics to protect the creditor." Grant nodded solemnly. He looked so credible. If I did not know him, I would have believed him. He was the golden son of Greenwich, the man who could do no wrong. I was just the eccentric sister who played with computers and refused to marry well. Judge Galloway sighed and picked up the document Sterling had flagged as Exhibit A. It was the forged promissory note. "Ms. Mercer, the judge said, his voice gravelly. I am looking at a signature here that looks remarkably like your client's. Do you have a response to this motion? Holly stood up. She didn't pick up a single piece of paper. She smoothed her skirt and walked to the center of the room. Your Honor, Holly said, her voice clear and unbothered. My client denies the existence of this debt. We assert that the document in your hand is a sophisticated forgery. However, we are not asking for a dismissal based on my word. We are waiting for a clarification of the chain of title regarding the funds Mr. Kensington claims to have lent. Sterling scoffed audibly. Chain of title. It is a wire transfer, Your Honor, from Mr. Kensington's personal holdings to Ms. James. Is it? Holly asked. She turned to look at Grant. For the first time, Grant shifted in his seat. Because according to the filing, the funds originated from a subtrust managed by the Sinclair estate, a trust that Mr. Kensington claims to have sole discretion over. My mother looked up from her handkerchief. Her eyes narrowed. This was not in the script. Judge Galloway rubbed his temples. Counselor, this is a bankruptcy hearing, not a probate audit. Unless you have proof that this document is invalid right now, I have to err on the side of caution. If the creditor's assets are at risk, the creditor is not who he says he is. Holly interrupted. It was the first time she had shown teeth. Judge Galloway frowned. He looked back down at the file. He flipped past the signature page to the addendums. He stopped. He squinted at something in the fine print of the bank authorization code. The room went silent. The only sound was the hum of the hard drives in the court reporter's machine. I watched the judge's face. He was a man who had seen everything, a man bored by the pettiness of the rich. But as he stared at that page, his boredom evaporated. His eyebrows knit together. He leaned forward, bringing the paper closer to his face, then looked up at Grant Kensington with a look of genuine confusion mixed with dawn recognition. Mr. Sterling, the judge said, and his tone had shifted. It was sharper now, dangerous. This transfer authorization code, it is dated 4 years ago, yet it references and routing number for a holding company that well. That is curious. Curious how? Your Honor? Sterling asked, sounding annoyed. It references the Sinclair Holdings Trust, the judge said. Specifically, the unallocated reserve. My father went stiff. I saw his hand grip the armrest of his chair so hard his knuckles turned white. Grant lost his smile. I fail to see the relevance, Sterling snapped. The relevance, the judge said, lowering the paper, is that I presided over the probate of Vivian Sinclair 2 years ago, and I distinctly remember the specific instructions regarding the unallocated reserve. The air in the room changed. It became heavy, charged with static. Counsel, the judge said, looking at both lawyers. Approach the bench, now. Sterling stood up, buttoning his jacket aggressively. Holly walked forward calmly, but before they could reach the judge, a sound echoed from the back of the room. It was the heavy, distinct clack of the double doors being unlatched. Every head in the courtroom turned. The doors swung open. A man stepped inside. He was not a bailiff. He was not court staff. He was wearing a charcoal 3-piece suit that looked older than anyone in the room, cut in a style that screamed old-world authority. He carried a leather briefcase that was battered and scarred. He walked down the center aisle with a rhythm that commanded silence. He did not look at the gallery. He did not look at me. He looked only at the judge. This is a closed hearing. The bailiff started to move forward, hand on his belt. Sit down, deputy, the stranger said. His voice was not loud, but it projected to every corner of the room. It was a voice used to giving orders that were obeyed without question. The stranger reached the bar separating the gallery from the legal pit. He unlatched the small gate and walked through. Sterling turned, his face red with indignation. Who do you think you are barging in here? Sterling demanded. Your Honor, have this man removed. Judge Galloway was staring at the man. The judge's face had gone pale. Mr. Vance, the judge asked. It was a whisper. I froze. I knew that name. I had seen it on old birthday cards sent to my grandmother years ago, on legal correspondence I wasn't supposed to read. Noah Vance. He was my grandmother's personal attorney, a man who had supposedly retired to an island in the Mediterranean 10 years ago. "Good morning, Judge Galloway," Noah Vance said. He stopped before the bench and placed his briefcase on the plaintiff's table, shoving Grant's papers aside without a glance. "I apologize for the theatrical timing. Traffic coming in from the airport was worse than anticipated." "You have no standing here," Sterling shouted. "We are in the middle of a motion." "Actually," Noah Vance said, snapping the latches of his briefcase open, "I have the only standing that matters." He reached into the bag and pulled out a thick envelope. It was not the standard white or manila legal envelope. It was heavy, cream-colored parchment, and on the back, sealing the flap, was a circle of black wax stamped with an intricate crest, the Sinclair crest. Grant let out a noise that sounded like a strangled gasp. My mother had stopped crying. She was staring at the black wax as if it were a venomous snake. "I am appearing on behalf of the Sinclair Holdings Trust," Noah Vance announced to the room. He held the envelope up. "Specifically, I am here to execute the activation clause." "The what?" Sterling asked, confused. He looked at Grant for guidance, but Grant was paralyzed. "The activation clause," Noah repeated. He handed the envelope to the judge. Vivian Sinclair stipulated that this envelope was to remain sealed in the vault of the firm Vance & Associates until a specific set of criteria were met. Criterion 1. A member of the Kensington family attempts to use legal force to bankrupt a direct lineal descendant of Vivian Sinclair. Criterion 2. Said attempt involves the fabrication of financial debts. I felt my heart hammering against my ribs. My grandmother. She had been dead for 2 years. How could she have known Judge Galloway took the envelope? His hands were shaking slightly. He broke the wax seal. The crack of the hardened wax was loud in the silent room. He pulled out a single flash drive and a sheet of paper. "It is verified," the judge said, his voice barely above a whisper. He looked at the bailiff. "Connect this drive to the evidence display system. Now." "Objection," Sterling roared. "You cannot just play random evidence introduced by a stranger." "Overruled," the judge snapped, slamming his gavel down with a violence that made everyone jump. "Sit down, counselor, or I will hold you in contempt." The bailiff took the drive. He plugged it into the console on the clerk's desk. The large monitors mounted on the walls of the courtroom flickered. Static hissed through the speakers, then cleared. A video feed appeared. It was an office, dark wood paneling, heavy velvet curtains, a desk that looked like it belonged to a queen. And sitting behind the desk, looking directly into the camera lens, was my grandmother, Vivian Sinclair. She looked exactly as she had the last time I saw her alive. Her silver hair was pulled back in a severe chignon. Her eyes, the same ice blue as mine, were sharp and unforgiving. She wore her signature high-collared black blouse and the diamond brooch that was rumored to have belonged to a Russian duchess. The room was so quiet, I could hear the hum of the ventilation system. My family was frozen. My father looked like he was having a stroke. My mother's hand was covering her mouth. Grant was pale, sweat beading on his forehead. On the screen, Vivian leaned forward. The camera zoomed in slightly on her face. The resolution was crystal clear. It felt like she was in the room with us, breathing the same air. She didn't smile. Vivian Sinclair never smiled unless she had drawn blood. "Hello, family." Vivian's voice boomed through the courtroom speakers. It was dry, raspy, and terrifyingly authoritative. She paused, as if waiting for us to settle down. Her eyes seemed to scan the room, moving from the judge, to Grant, to my parents, and finally, resting on where I would be sitting. "If you are watching this," Vivian said, "it means that my son-in-law and my grandson have finally done exactly what I predicted they would do." She laced her fingers together on the desk. "You really thought I did not see?" she asked. The question hung in the air, heavy as lead. "You thought because I was old, because I was dying, that I did not see you circling like vultures." You thought you could wait until I was in the ground to pick the bones of the one child in this family who actually has a spine. On the screen. Vivian's gaze hardened. Well, she said, I am afraid I have some bad news for you. Grant, and for you, Robert, the game you are playing, I rigged it before you were even born. The screen cut to black for a split second, then returned to her face, tighter this time. Judge Galloway. The recording continued. You are likely presiding. I apologize for the drama, but these people do not learn from kindness. They only learn from pain. So, let us begin the lesson. I sat there, my breath trapped in my throat, staring at the face of the woman who had terrified me my entire childhood, realizing for the first time that the monster in my nightmares might just be the only angel I had left. To understand why the sight of my grandmother on that screen stopped my heart. You have to understand the house I grew up in. You have to understand that in the Kensington estate in Greenwich, truth was the only prohibited substance. The house was a sprawling colonial revival that sat on 4 acres of manicured suffering. From the outside, it was the American dream rendered in brick and ivy. Inside, it was a museum where we were the exhibits. My parents, Robert and Eleanor, did not raise children. They curated assets, and like any portfolio manager, they were quick to identify the underperformers. I was the underperformer. I was not abused in the way the nightly news defines it. I was never beaten. I was never starved. I was simply erased. My existence was treated like a smudge on a wine glass, something to be furiously polished away before the guests arrived. I was too quiet, too observant, and entirely too interested in how things worked rather than how they looked. Then there was Grant. If I was the smudge, Grant was the vintage champagne. My brother was 4 years older than me, and from the moment he could walk, he was being groomed for a coronation that had no kingdom. He was handsome in that generic, heavy-jawed way that signals money. He played lacrosse not because he liked it, but because it looked good on a transcript. He dated girls who were blonde and silent. In our house, Grant's failures were renamed as learning experiences. When he crashed his first car into a neighbor's hedge while high on painkillers, my father called it a youthful indiscretion and bought the neighbor a new landscaping contract. When Grant flunked out of his first semester at business school, my mother told everyone he was taking a gap year to study emerging markets in Europe. I watched this from the shadows of the staircase. I watched Grant break things and get rewarded for it. I watched him lie and get praised for his creativity. I went the other way. While Grant was learning how to shake hands and fake sincerity, I was in the library, obsessed with disaster. I didn't want to create illusions. I wanted to understand why they collapsed. I studied structural engineering manuals when I was 12. By 16, I was reading actuarial tables. I found comfort in risk analytics because numbers didn't lie. Numbers didn't look at you with disappointment because you weren't wearing the right dress. In a probability model, everything had a cause and an effect. If you built on a weak foundation, you fell. It was the only justice I knew. My parents hated it. It is morbid, Hallie, my mother would say, wrinkling her nose as she saw my textbooks. Why must you be so obsessed with things going wrong? It is practically bad luck. It is reality, Mother, I would say. It is boring, she would correct me, turning back to her mirror. And no one invites boring to the gala. The divide between us became a canyon when I graduated college. I had a degree in data science and a vision for a new kind of risk assessment algorithm. I wanted to build a company that could predict systemic failures in supply chains before they happened. It was unsexy, invisible work. It was the plumbing of the global economy. Grant, meanwhile, had been given a vice president title at my father's investment firm, a job that seemed to consist entirely of lunch meetings and golf. I made the mistake of thinking my family might respect ambition, even if they didn't respect me. I was 22, naive, and desperate for a scrap of approval. I prepared a pitch. I needed a small seed investment, $50,000, to buy the server space for my first prototype. I remember the day clearly. It was Sunday brunch on the patio. The sun was filtering through the trellis, dappling the white tablecloth. My father was reading the Wall Street Journal. Grant was hungover, wearing sunglasses. I laid out my business plan. I spoke for 10 minutes, passionate and precise. I showed them the market gap. I showed them the projected returns. When I finished, there was a long silence. I waited, my hands sweating under the table. Then, Grant chuckled. It started as a snort and turned into a laugh. "Supply chains," Grant said, shaking his head. "You want to be a janitor for logistics data, Hallie? Come on. That is not a business. That is a homework assignment." I looked at my father. "Dad, the numbers are solid." My father folded his newspaper slowly. He looked at me with that familiar, weary expression, the look of a man dealing with a persistent pest. "Hallie," he said, "we invest in leaders. We invest in vision. He tapped my binder with a manicured finger. "This is back-end work. It is clerical. It is not Kensington. It is innovation," I argued, my voice tight. "It is embarrassing," my mother chimed in, slicing a melon. "Imagine explaining this at the club." "Oh yes, my daughter checks inventory lists for trucking companies. You simply do not fit that world. Darling, you are too heavy. You lack the touch." "You are saying no?" I asked. "I am saying know your place," my father said, picking up his coffee. "Grant has an idea for a boutique lifestyle app. Now that is something we can put the family name on. You should look for a nice administrative job, something where you do not have to talk to clients." They laughed then, a gentle, collective, family chuckle. They weren't trying to be cruel. They were just so convinced of my insignificance that my ambition was genuinely funny to them. I sat there, burning with humiliation, and gathered my papers. From the far end of the table, a shadow moved. My grandmother, Vivian Sinclair, was sitting in her wheelchair. By that time, she was already mostly housebound, her body failing even if her mind remained a steel trap. She rarely spoke during these brunches. She mostly watched us, her eyes hooded, pecking at her toast like a bird. Vivian was not a warm woman. She did not bake cookies. She did not give hugs. She was the source of the family wealth, the matriarch who had built Sinclair Holdings from the ground up after her husband died in the 70s. She terrified my father. She tolerated my mother. As I stood up to leave, holding back tears, Vivian's cane tapped sharply against the stone patio. "Sit down, Hallie," she commanded. Her voice was raspy, damaged from years of smoking, but it cut through the laughter like a knife. My father stiffened. "Mother Sinclair, we were just explaining reality to her." "You were explaining your own limitations," Vivian snapped. She turned her head slowly to look at me. Her eyes were terrifyingly intelligent. They stripped you bare. "Bring me the binder," she said. I walked over and handed it to her. She opened it. She didn't look at the graphics. She looked at the math. She scanned the columns of data I had compiled. She spent 5 minutes reading in silence while the rest of the table awkwardly buttered their toast. Finally, she closed the binder. She didn't give it back to me. She kept her hand on it. "Go to the library, Hallie," she said. "I will meet you there." Later, in the dim light of the library, smelling of old leather and dust, Vivian Sinclair looked at me from her chair. "They are idiots," she said. It was a statement of fact, devoid of emotion. "Your father is a pompous windbag, and your mother cares more about the opinion of people she hates than the reality of her own bank account. And Grant," she let out a sharp breath, "Grant is a hollow suit. If the wind blows too hard, he will fall over." "They think I am a joke," I whispered. "No," Vivian said. She leaned forward. "They do not think you are a joke. They are afraid of you." I looked up, surprised. "Afraid they laugh at me." "They laugh to hide it," she said. "You see things, Hallie, you always have. You see the rot in the floorboards while they are admiring the chandelier. People like that, people who live in a fantasy, they hate the ones who bring the flashlight. They do not hate you because you are less than them. They hate you because you might be right." She pushed the binder back to me. "I cannot give you the money," she said. I felt my heart sink. Why you have millions? Because if I give it to you, they will say you are a charity case, she said sternly. And because my finances are complicated right now. Your father manages the main trust. If I move money to you, he will block it. Or worse, he will steal the idea and give it to Grant. She reached out and took my hand. Her grip was cold and bony, but strong. You have to do this alone, Hallie. You have to go out there and build it with scraps. You have to let them think you are nothing. Let them underestimate you. It is your greatest weapon. That is not fair, I said. Fair is a fairy tale for poor people, Vivian replied. You want justice. Get rich, get powerful, and wait. That was the last real conversation we had. 2 years later, Vivian died. The funeral was a masterpiece of Kensington theater. My mother wore black Dior and wept beautifully on cue. Grant gave a eulogy about her generous spirit that he had clearly copied from a website. I stood at the back, wearing an old suit, dry-eyed. I didn't cry because I knew she wouldn't have wanted me to perform for them. After the funeral came the reading of the will, or rather, the non-reading. My father sat us down in the living room, pouring scotch. He looked solemn, but I could see the relief in his shoulders. The old witch was dead. The money was finally fully his to control. Your grandmother's estate was complex, he told us. Most of it was tied up in trusts to maintain the properties and the family investments. She wanted to ensure the Kensington legacy remained intact. He looked at Grant and smiled. Grant, the voting shares of the main portfolio will transfer to you, under my supervision, of course. It is time you stepped up. Then he looked at me. Hallie, he said, his voice dropping to that pitying tone again. Grandmother Vivian felt that given your unconventional lifestyle and your struggles to find a path, it would be irresponsible to burden you with capital management. She left you her collection of vintage maps. She knew you liked looking at things. Grant smirked into his glass. Maps? That is cute. You can hang them in your apartment, if you still have one. I felt a coldness spread through my chest. It wasn't about the money. I had already started Blackwater by then, scraping by on credit cards and ramen. It was the finality of it. Even in death, she had left me nothing but old paper. Had our conversation in the library been a lie? Had she really seen me? Or was I just a momentary amusement for a dying woman? Is that it? I asked. The estate is settled, Hallie, my father said, closing the file. We will have the map sent to you. Try not to be bitter. It is unbecoming. I didn't fight. I didn't scream. I had spent 30 years being trained that my voice didn't matter in this room. I stood up, walked out of the house, and drove back to my tiny, heatless apartment in Pittsburgh. I hung the maps on the wall. I looked at them every day while I built my company, while I didn't sleep, while I turned my anger into algorithms. I accepted that I was the stain. I accepted that I was alone. But as I sat in that courtroom 2 years later, staring at the screen where Vivian was speaking from the grave, I realized I had made a miscalculation. I had assumed the maps were just paper. I had assumed the silence was abandonment. I had forgotten the one thing Vivian Sinclair valued above all else: patience. She hadn't left me out. She had just hidden me, buried deep in the noise, waiting for the exact moment when the Kensingtons would be arrogant enough to trigger the trap. She knew them better than I did. She knew they wouldn't just be content with their millions. She knew they would eventually try to destroy me, and she had been waiting, in the dark, for 2 years, to catch them doing it. Pittsburgh was the anti-Greenwich. That was exactly why I chose it. If my childhood home was a place of manicured hedges and silent judgments, Pittsburgh was steel, bridges, and honest dirt. It was a city that had broken its back and rebuilt itself, which made it the only logical place for me to do the same. I rented a space in a converted radiator factory in the Strip District. It was 600 square feet of exposed brick, drafty windows, and floors that smelled permanently of machine oil. I named the company Blackwater Risk Analytics. The name sounded ominous, opaque. It sounded like something you hired when you were afraid of what was hiding in the dark. That was the point. My business model was simple but brutal to execute. I built predictive algorithms for hospitals and municipal infrastructure. I wasn't looking for stock market trends. I was looking for the invisible cracks. I tracked the likelihood of a supplier in Malaysia going bankrupt and cutting off a hospital's supply of sterile gloves. I calculated the probability of a water treatment plant software being patched incorrectly 3 years prior, leading to a catastrophic failure today. I sold paranoia, packaged as data. For the first 18 months, I was the CEO, the janitor, the lead developer, and the sales team. My day started at 4 in the morning. I would wake up on a second-hand sofa I kept in the corner of the office, my back stiff against the springs. I would wash my face in the communal bathroom down the hall, the water always freezing, shocking my system awake. By 5, I was coding. I built the core architecture of the Blackwater engine from scratch. I wrote thousands of lines of Python and SQL, creating a web that scraped shipping manifests, local news reports from industrial towns in China, and weather patterns. I taught the machine to look for silence. In supply chains, noise is normal. Silence means someone is hiding a problem. By 9 in the morning, I switched roles. I put on the one good blazer I owned, smoothed back my hair, and started cold calling hospital administrators. Mr. Henderson, I would say to a skeptical procurement director at a mid-sized clinic in Ohio, I am not selling you insurance. I am telling you that your primary vendor for surgical tubing is currently being investigated for tax fraud in 3 jurisdictions, and if you do not diversify by Friday, you will have 0 inventory in 6 weeks. Usually, they hung up. They told me I was fear-mongering. They told me they had big audit firms handling this. But I was relentless. I lived on instant oatmeal and dollar-slice pizza. I didn't turn on the heat in the office unless a client was coming to visit, which was rare. I wore fingerless gloves while I typed to keep my hands from cramping in the cold. I didn't have a social life. I didn't have friends. I had a server rack that hummed in the corner like a demanding child. My first real break turned into my first real scar. I had brought on a partner early on, a guy named Marcus, who I met at a tech mixer. He was charming, older, with a resume that boasted about scaling startups. He told me he could handle the business development while I focused on the code. I was desperate for help, desperate to sleep more than 3 hours a night. I let him in. I gave him access to the client database I had spent 6 months bleeding to build. 3 months later, I walked into the office to find his desk cleared out. Marcus hadn't just left. He had downloaded my proprietary risk assessments for 3 regional medical centers, my only promising leads, and taken them to a competitor. He sold my work as his own consulting package. I remember sitting on the floor of that empty office, staring at the gap where his computer used to be. I had $86 in my business account. Rent was due in 4 days. I had been betrayed by my family for being useless, and now I had been betrayed by a stranger for being useful. I didn't cry. I didn't have the hydration to spare for tears. Instead, I got angry, not the hot, screaming anger of a child, but the cold, absolute zero resolve of a survivor. I spent the next 72 hours rewriting the security protocols of my system. I built a digital fortress. I encrypted every data packet so heavily that even if someone stole it, it would look like gibberish without my personal biometric key. I swore then that Blackwater would never again rely on trust. It would rely on leverage. I survived that month by selling my car. I walked 3 miles to the office every day in the Pennsylvania rain. I hired my first real employee 6 months later. His name was Leo, a college dropout with a hoodie permanently glued to his head and a genius-level talent for pattern recognition. I paid him with the last of my savings and a promise of equity. "Why risk it?" Leo asked me during his interview, looking around my bleak, underfurnished office. "You look like you are 1 bad week away from living under a bridge." "Because I am right," I told him, "and the world is getting more dangerous every day. Eventually, people will pay to know where the landmines are." Leo stayed. We landed our first major contract that winter. A network of 12 hospitals in the tri-state area had suffered a massive supply shock during a flu season because their just-in-time inventory system failed. They were panicked. They needed a failsafe. I walked into the boardroom facing 12 executives in expensive suits. I didn't look like them. I looked tired. I looked hungry. But when I plugged my laptop into the projector and showed them a live map of their logistical vulnerabilities, glowing red like fresh wounds, the room went silent. I can give you a 48-hour lead time on any disruption, I said, but it will cost you. They signed. The check for that contract was for $150,000. When it cleared, I stared at the banking app on my phone for 20 minutes. It wasn't millions, but it was oxygen. It meant we could buy better servers. It meant I could pay Leo a real salary. It meant I could move out of the office and rent a studio apartment with a working radiator. But with success came a new danger visibility. I knew that if the name Kensington appeared anywhere near Blackwater, the narrative would change. If the industry found out I was the daughter of Robert Kensington, the Greenwich Titan, they wouldn't see a self-made innovator. They would see a bored heiress playing with daddy's money. Or worse, my father would find out and try to crush me for succeeding without his permission. So I became a ghost. I incorporated the company in Delaware under a labyrinth of LLCs, on all public documents. I was listed simply as H. James. I refused all video interviews. I declined 40 under 40 lists. I didn't have a LinkedIn photo. When potential clients asked about my background, I gave them a vague story about working in back-end logistics for nameless firms. I separated Hallie the CEO from Hallie the Kensington with surgical precision. I wore generic suits. I drove a used Honda. I lived a life that looked nothing like the one I had left behind. I was hiding my success the way other people hide an addiction. By year 3, Blackwater was generating $2 million in annual revenue. We had 18 employees. We were monitoring the supply chains for 3 major hospital networks and the water sanitation department of a mid-sized city. But I wanted more. I wanted the unshakable thing. I wanted a contract so big, so foundational, that no one could ever dismiss me again. Then came the request for proposal from the Office of National Resilience. It was a fictional-sounding name for a very real, very serious federal agency tasked with monitoring the integrity of national infrastructure bridges, power grids, emergency medical stockpiles. They were looking for a next-generation predictive modeling partner. The contract value was staggering, $80 million over 5 years. Every major defense contractor and consulting firm in D.C. was bidding for it. Lockheed, Deloitte, McKinsey. They had armies of lobbyists and glossy brochures. I had Leo and a proprietary algorithm that was faster, leaner, and meaner than anything the giants had. We worked for 6 weeks straight. We didn't sleep. We ate takeout containers of pad thai at 3 a.m, our eyes burning from blue light. We built a simulation of a hypothetical grid failure in Texas and showed how the cascading effects would cripple the medical supply chain in 3 other states. It was terrifying. It was brilliant. We submitted the proposal at 11:59 on the deadline day. Then we waited. The silence lasted for 4 months. I was sitting in my office on a Tuesday afternoon in November, reviewing a server upgrade budget. When the phone rang, it was a Washington, D.C. area code. I picked it up. "Ms. James," a stern voice asked. "This is Director Reynolds from the Office of National Resilience." My hand gripped the phone so hard, I thought the plastic might crack. "Yes, Director." "We have reviewed your simulation," he said. "It scared the hell out of my analysts. You found vulnerabilities we didn't know we had." "That is what I do," I said, my voice steady, despite my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest. "We are bypassing the secondary review," Reynolds said. "We are awarding the primary analytics contract to Blackwater. We want your team in DRC on Monday to finalize the clearance protocols." I hung up the phone. I didn't scream. I didn't jump. I just sat there, in the quiet hum of my office, and felt a wave of vindication so powerful it made me dizzy. I had done it. I had built an $80 million wall between me and my past. But the universe has a cruel sense of humor. Success of that magnitude is impossible to keep entirely in the dark. Government contracts are public record, even the sensitive ones. 2 days later, A niche industry publication called the Federal Contractor Daily ran a short blurb on page 4. It wasn't a front-page story. It was just a dry announcement of award recipients. Blackwater Risk Analytics, a Pittsburgh-based firm headed by Ms. Hallie James, secures major resilience contract. It should have been harmless. It was a trade rag that only policy wonks read. But I had forgotten that my brother, Grant, had recently hired a new team of aggressive investment scouts whose sole job was to scan the market for emerging tech players to acquire or destroy. I didn't know it then, but that single sentence in a digital newsletter was the loose thread that would unravel everything. It was the signal flare that told the vultures exactly where the body was buried. I was celebrating with a cheap bottle of champagne with Leo when the email notification popped up on my phone. It wasn't from the government. It wasn't from a client. It was a Google alert I had set up for my own name years ago and forgotten about. New mention, Hallie James. Blackwater Risk Analytics. I clicked the link. It wasn't the trade journal. It was a forwarded newsletter in an investment banking forum, with a comment highlighted in the margin. Is this the Kensington girl, the runaway? Someone look into the cap table. If she landed this whale, she is sitting on a gold mine. The champagne turned to vinegar in my mouth. They knew. I looked at Leo, who was laughing at something on his screen. Oblivious. I felt the cold shadow of Greenwich stretching across 300 miles, reaching out to drag me back. I knew my family. I knew they wouldn't applaud. They would come for their cut. I just didn't realize they wouldn't be satisfied with a cut. They would want the whole carcass. The death of my company did not come with a bang. It did not come with a fire or a server crash. It came with a silent, digital suffocation on a Thursday morning, exactly 48 hours before payroll was due. I was sitting at my desk, finalizing the onboarding documents for the Office of National Resilience. The office was buzzing. Leo was in the break room arguing about coffee beans with our new junior analyst. The air felt light, charged with the electric hum of a future that finally felt secure. We had the contract, we had the roadmap, we had made it. Then, I tried to authorize the bi-weekly transfer to our payroll provider. I clicked Submit. Usually, a green checkmark would appear within 2 seconds. This time, the screen stalled. The loading wheel spun. It spun for 10 seconds, then 20, then the screen flashed a color I had never seen on our banking portal before. It wasn't the red of an error, it was the gray of a lockout. A message box popped up, transaction failed. Account status, frozen pursuant to court order, NY 7742. I stared at the screen. I blinked, thinking perhaps my contact lenses were dry. I refreshed the page. Account status, frozen. I tried the secondary operating account, frozen. I tried the reserve capital account, frozen. Even the petty cash debit card linked to the main system was dead. My stomach dropped so hard I felt nauseous. I grabbed my phone and dialed the bank's priority line. "This is Hallie James, CEO of Blackwater," I said, my voice shaking despite my best efforts to clamp it down. "I am looking at a freeze on my corporate accounts. There must be a mistake. We have ample liquidity." The representative on the other end sounded sympathetic but distant. "One moment. Ms. James, yes, I see the flag here. This is not a liquidity issue. We received a temporary restraining order and an attachment of assets this morning from the Southern District of New York." "On what grounds?" I demanded. "I haven't been sued. I haven't been served." "The plaintiff filed an emergency ex parte motion," the rep said, "alleging imminent flight risk and dissipation of assets. The creditor is, let me see, Mr. Grant Kensington." The name hit me like a physical blow to the chest. Grant. I dropped the phone. It clattered onto the desk, but I didn't hear it. The noise of the office, Leo's laughter, the typing, the hum of the servers suddenly sounded like it was coming from underwater. Grant had found me, and he hadn't just come to talk. He had come to execute me. An hour later, a process server walked into the lobby. He was a bored-looking man in a windbreaker who handed me a thick envelope and left without a word. I took the papers into my office and locked the door. I closed the blinds. I didn't want the team to see my hands shaking. I tore open the seal. It was a lawsuit. Grant Kensington v. Hallie James and Blackwater Risk Analytics. I read the complaint, my eyes racing over the legal jargon. It was a masterpiece of fiction. According to the document, 4 years ago, on the day I registered my first LLC, Grant had supposedly loaned me $2,400,000. I gasped. $2.4 million. I had started this company with $12,000 and a maxed-out credit card. I flipped to Exhibit A. It was a promissory note. It looked official. The paper stock was scanned to look aged. The date was correct for the timeline of my company's founding, and at the bottom, right next to Grant's flamboyant, sweeping signature, was mine. I stared at it. Hallie James. It looked like my signature. It had the sharp upswing on the J. It had the tight loop on the E. To a layman, or even a judge, it looked perfect. But I'm not a layman. I am an analyst. I look for the microscopic deviations and patterns. I pulled a magnifying glass from my drawer and held it over the paper. There it was, the hesitation mark. When I sign my name, it is a single, fluid muscle memory. It takes less than a second. But here, on the curve of the S in James, the ink was slightly pooled, as if the pen had paused for a fraction of a millisecond. It was a tracing. Someone had taken an old birthday card, or perhaps a thank you note I had written to my mother years ago, projected it, and carefully drawn over it. It was a forgery, a high-quality, expensive forgery, but a lie nonetheless. Grant wasn't just suing me, he was framing me. The strategy became clear as I read the motion for the freeze. They claimed that because I had just won a government contract, so they knew. I was planning to wash the funds through offshore shell companies to avoid repaying my original investor. They painted me as a desperate, unethical operator who was about to run off with the taxpayers' money. My phone rang again. This time, the caller ID made my blood run cold. Office of National Resilience, Director Reynolds. I took a breath. I needed to sound calm. I needed to sound like a CEO, not a cornered animal. Director Reynolds, I answered. Good afternoon. Ms. James, Reynolds' voice was ice. We just received a notification from our compliance department. Is it true that your company is currently under a federal asset freeze regarding a fraud allegation? It is a misunderstanding, Director, I said quickly. It is a frivolous family dispute, a clerical error. We are sorting it out immediately. A federal judge doesn't sign a freeze order for a clerical error, Ms. James, Reynolds said. We deal with national security. We cannot have a contractor with compromised liquidity or pending fraud charges. It is a level 1 risk factor. I can assure you. I am afraid I have to suspend the contract onboarding, he interrupted. You have 5 business days to resolve this completely. If the freeze is not lifted and the allegations cleared by next Wednesday, we move to the runner-up bidder. We cannot wait. The grid doesn't wait. The line went dead. I sat there, the silence of the room pressing in on me. 5 days. They had timed it perfectly. They knew exactly when to strike to cause the maximum amount of damage. I didn't call my parents. I didn't call Grant. I knew that was what they wanted. They wanted me to call, crying, begging, so they could record it and play it back to their lawyers. Instead, I called Holly Mercer. Holly was a terrifyingly sharp litigator I had met once at a Women in Tech conference. She was known for being aggressive, expensive, and utterly uninterested in playing nice with the old boys club. I met her at a diner 3 blocks from my office. I didn't want her to see the panic in my staff's eyes. I slid the lawsuit across the sticky table. Holly read it while eating a fry. She didn't look surprised. It is a classic chokehold, Holly said, wiping salt from her fingers. They don't want the $2 million. Hallie, they know you don't have $2 million in liquid cash sitting around. They forged my signature, I said, tapping the paper. It is a crime. It is only a crime if we can prove it, Holly said. And proving a forgery takes time. We need a forensic handwriting expert. We need to subpoena the metadata of the document. We need to trace the supposed wire transfer of the funds. That takes weeks, maybe months. I don't have months, I said. I have 5 days. If the accounts aren't open by Wednesday, I lose the government contract. If I lose the contract, I have no revenue. If I have no revenue, I can't pay you. I can't pay my staff, and Blackwater goes under. Holly looked at me, her dark eyes serious. That is the point. Hallie, this isn't a lawsuit to recover a debt. This is a demolition order. She leaned in. Think about it. Your brother finds out you landed a massive deal. He gets jealous. But more than that, he gets greedy. If he bankrupts you now, what happens to your intellectual property? What happens to your algorithms? They go into the bankruptcy estate, I whispered. Exactly, Holly said. And who will be there? Ready to buy the assets of Blackwater Risk Analytics for pennies on the dollar, a shell company owned by Grant Kensington. He doesn't just want to stop you, he wants to steal your work, repaint it, and sell it himself. He wants to be the one who saved the technology from his incompetent sister. I felt a cold rage settle in my gut. It was clearer now. This wasn't just about the money, it was about narrative. In the Kensington story, I was the failure. If I succeeded, I proved them wrong. I proved that their entire value system, their connections, their pedigree, their image was unnecessary. I proved that I didn't need them, and that was the one sin they could not forgive. So how do we fight it? I asked. How do we beat a lie that is moving faster than the truth? We have to go to court, Holly said. We file an emergency motion to vacate the freeze. We claim bad faith, but I have to warn you. Hallie, the judge is going to look at that signature, and he is going to look at your brother's last name, and he is going to hesitate. Courts love paper, and right now, they have the paper. We have to try, I said. I went back to the office. I had to face my team. 18 faces looked up when I walked in. They knew something was wrong. The internet was down because the auto-pay had bounced. The coffee machine was empty. Listen to me, I said, my voice steady. We are hitting some turbulence, legal turbulence. There is an attack on the company from a competitor. I didn't tell them the competitor was my own flesh and blood. It was too shameful. Payroll is going to be delayed, I said. The room went silent. Leo looked down at his shoes. He had a kid on the way. I knew he lived paycheck to paycheck. I am fixing it, I promised. I need you to trust me for 72 hours. Just keep the servers running. Keep the data flowing. If we stop, they win. That night, I didn't go home. I stayed in the office, digging. I needed to know how Grant had known. I needed to find the leak. I scoured the web. I looked for mentions of Blackwater. And finally, I found it. It was a digital footprint. Faint but distinct. Grant hadn't found out from a spy. He hadn't found out from a leak in my office. He had found out from a brag. I found a cached version of a post on a private forum for high-net-worth investors. A user with the handle GMoneyKGrant. Ever the Subtle One had posted a query 3 weeks ago. Hypothetical. If a family member uses family funds to start a business and then lands a federal contract, does the original gift convert to equity, asking for a friend? The responses were a Shark Tank. Lawyers and investors urging him to paper the debt immediately. One comment stood out. If you didn't sign a loan agreement back then, make one now. Backdate it. As long as the signature holds up, the burden of proof is on them. Freeze the assets before they can cash out. He had taken advice from an internet forum on how to destroy his sister. It was so pathetic, so small, and yet so devastatingly effective. I printed the forum thread. It wasn't proof of forgery, not legally, but it was proof of intent. It showed he was looking for a way to claim ownership after the success, not before. I sat in the dark, the city lights of Pittsburgh flickering outside. I thought about the bridge loan I had begged for years ago. I thought about them laughing at me at the brunch table. Beg properly. That was what Grant would say when I saw him. They expected me to fold. They expected me to run back to Greenwich, cry into my mother's lap, and sign over the company in exchange for them making the lawsuit go away. They expected Hallie the Smudge, but Hallie the Smudge was dead. She had died in a radiator factory, cold and hungry, writing code that could predict disasters. I wasn't going to beg. I picked up my phone and dialed Holly. "File the response," I said. "We are going to court. It is a risk." "Hallie," Holly warned. "If the judge rules against us, the bankruptcy becomes official. You will be branded a fraud forever." "I know the odds," I said. "I am a risk analyst, and right now, the only way out is through—" I hung up. I looked at the map of the United States on my wall. The vintage map Vivian had left me. It was the only thing I had of hers. "Help me," I whispered to the empty room. "You said you saw me. If you can see me now, tell me what to do." I didn't expect an answer, but as I stared at the map, my eyes drifted to the corner, to the legend. There was a small, handwritten note in the margin. In faded ink, it was Vivian's handwriting. "The path is never straight. Look for the hidden currents." I frowned. I had looked at this map 1,000 times. I had never noticed that note. And then, my email pinged. It was 3 a.m. Who was emailing me at 3 a.m? I opened it. The sender was Sinclair Trust Automated System. My heart stopped. The subject line was just a string of code. Act Rec Breach Protocol Detected. Subject, Hallie James. I clicked the body of the email. It was short. "If you are reading this, legal action has been initiated against you by a member of the Kensington family. Please verify your identity to access the archival retrieval system. Reference activation clause." I sat back, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I thought it was a prank, a phishing scam, but the email address had ended in a domain that hadn't been active since my grandmother's law firm dissolved. I typed in my social security number. The screen buffered. Then, a single line of text appeared. "Contact Noah Vance. He has the envelope." I didn't know who Noah Vance was. I didn't know what was in the envelope. But in that moment, as the walls of my company were crumbling around me, I realized that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't fighting this war alone. Driving back to Greenwich felt less like going home and more like re-entering the orbit of a dying star. The gravity was heavy, crushing, and invisible. I drove my battered Honda Civic, the same one I had bought used 3 years ago, past the iron gates that marked the entrance to the Kensington estate, the guard at the booth. A new hire who didn't recognize me made me show my driver's license before buzzing me through. That was fitting. To this house, I wasn't a daughter. I was a visitor, and a suspicious one at that. I had spent the last 6 hours calculating the probability of this meeting ending well. The algorithm in my head returned a success rate of less than 4%, but I had 18 employees who needed to pay rent. I had a federal contract that was bleeding out on the table. The Noah Vance lead from the mysterious email the night before had hit a dead end. The phone number was disconnected, and the firm listed was closed. I didn't have time to chase ghosts. I needed cash, immediate, liquid cash to bond the injunction and release my payroll. So, I had to do the one thing I swore I would never do. I had to beg. I parked the Honda between my father's Range Rover and Grant's silver Porsche. The contrast was so stark, it looked like a satirical art installation. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. I looked tired. My skin was pale, and there were dark circles under my eyes that no amount of concealer could hide. I looked exactly like what I was, a woman on the edge of ruin. I didn't knock. I used the key I still kept on my ring. A brass relic from a life I had abandoned. The house smelled of lilies and furniture polish. It was silent. That specific, heavy silence of a house that is cleaned by strangers and inhabited by people who avoid each other. "In the solarium, Miss Hallie," the housekeeper said, appearing silently from the hallway. She didn't smile. The staff at Kensington Manor knew better than to show affection to the black sheep. I walked down the long corridor, my heels clicking on the marble. They were waiting for me. It was a tableau of casual wealth. My mother was arranging flowers in a crystal vase. My father was scrolling through his tablet, and Grant was standing by the window, swirling a glass of amber liquid, looking out at the manicured lawn. He turned as I entered. He was smiling. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of a hunter who sees the deer limp into the clearing. "Well," Grant said, raising his glass. "The prodigal data scientist returns. To what do we owe the pleasure? Did you run out of ramen noodles?" I ignored the jab. I needed to be professional. I needed to treat this like a business merger, not a family reunion. "Hello, Grant, Mother, Father. You look thin. Hallie," my mother said, not looking up from her flowers. She snipped a stem with a sharp click. "Stress creates wrinkles, you know." "I am here to talk business," I said. Standing in the center of the room, I didn't sit. No one had offered me a chair. "Business." My father placed his tablet on the table. He looked at me with that familiar mix of boredom and irritation. "I thought you were a big federal contractor now. Shouldn't you be in Washington, shaking hands with generals?" "I would be," I said, keeping my voice steady. "If my accounts hadn't been frozen this morning, due to a fraudulent lawsuit filed by my own brother," Grant chuckled. He walked over to the sofa and sat down, spreading his arms along the backrest. "Fraudulent is a strong word, Hallie. I prefer collection of outstanding liabilities." "I never borrowed $2 million from you, Grant," I said, turning to him. "You know it. I know it. That document is a forgery." "The court seems to think otherwise," Grant said breezily. "But let us not argue legalities. You are here, which means the freeze is working. You are squeezed." I took a breath. I had to swallow the bile rising in my throat. "I have payroll due in 24 hours, I said. "I have a contract with the Office of National Resilience that will be voided if I don't show liquidity by Wednesday. I am not asking for a handout. I am asking for a bridge loan. $500,000. I will pay you 10% interest. I will sign a legitimate note. I just need to unlock the accounts." The room went quiet. My mother stopped snipping. My father took off his reading glasses. Grant looked at me, his eyes gleaming with delight. "You want money?" he asked softly. "I want to save my company," I said. "And I'm willing to pay for it." Grant stood up. He walked over to the antique desk in the corner. He opened a drawer and pulled out a checkbook. He uncapped a fountain pen. "500,000, Grant muttered, as if he were calculating a tip at a restaurant. "It is a lot of money, Hallie, but we are family." He scribbled something on the check. He tore it out with a crisp, ripping sound. He held it between two fingers. "Come and get it," he said. I took a step forward. "Ah," Grant said, holding up a hand. "Not like that." I stopped. "Excuse me." Grant smiled. "A cold, dead thing. You stand there, in your cheap suit, demanding help like you are entitled to it. After you ignored us for years, after you embarrassed us with your little garage startup, no." He pointed to the Persian rug at his feet. "You want this check?" Grant said. "Then you need to ask for it properly. Kneel." The word hung in the air. I looked at my parents. Surely, they would stop this. This was their son degrading their daughter. "Grant, really?" My mother sighed. But she wasn't objecting to the cruelty. She was objecting to the volume. "Must you be so dramatic?" "She needs to learn, Mother," Grant said, his eyes locked on mine. "She thinks she is better than us. She thinks she can make it on her own. I want to hear her say she can't. I want to hear her beg." I looked at my father. "Dad." My father sighed. He looked at me with profound disappointment. "You put yourself in this position, Hallie," he said. "You wanted to play in the big leagues. This is how the big leagues work. Leverage. Grant has the leverage. You have the need. If you want the capital, you meet the terms." "He is asking me to kneel," I said, my voice trembling. "He is asking for respect," my father corrected. "You have no backbone, Hallie. You never have. You just have stubbornness. There is a difference. If you had any real grit, you would do whatever it took to close the deal. But you are too proud. You are just a girl who causes trouble." I looked back at Grant. He was wavering the check slightly. "Tick-tock. Hallie," Grant whispered. 48 hours to payroll. 18 employees. Do it for them. Just get on your knees and say, 'Please, Grant, Save me. That is all. I looked at the check. It was salvation. It was the end of the panic. All I had to do was lower my body 3 feet. All I had to do was surrender my dignity, and my team would get paid. Leo would be able to buy a crib for his baby. The contract would be safe. My knees bent slightly, just an inch. Grant's smile widened. He saw it. He saw me breaking, and in that moment, seeing the triumph in his eyes, something inside me snapped. Not a bone, but a chain. The chain that had bound me to this family's approval for 36 years shattered. I straightened up. "No," I said. Grant's smile faltered. "What?" "No," I repeated. My voice wasn't loud, but it was rock steady. "I would rather watch my company burn to the ground than let you think you own me." "Then you will burn," Grant snarled, dropping the check. "I will bankrupt you. I will take your algorithms. I will strip that company for parts, and I will erase your name from the industry. You will be nothing." "You can try," I said. I turned around. "You are making a mistake, Hallie," my mother called out, her voice finally showing some emotion annoyance. "Don't be a fool. Come back here and apologize to your brother. We can find you a position in his office. You can be an assistant. It is a good life." "I don't want a good life," I said, not looking back. "I want my life." I walked out. I walked past the solarium, past the silent housekeeper, out the heavy oak door. I got into my Honda. I started the engine. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles were white. I didn't cry. I waited for the tears to come, for the wave of self-pity, but it didn't arrive. Instead, I felt a strange, cold emptiness. It was the feeling of a room after all the furniture has been moved out. They had taken everything from me, my history, my safety, my hope for their love, but they hadn't taken my mind. I drove for 2 hours, aimlessly, until I found a cheap motel off the interstate. I couldn't bear to go back to the office yet. I couldn't face Leo empty-handed. I sat on the lumpy motel bed, the neon light from the sign outside buzzing against the window. I opened my laptop. I had to draft an email to the team. I had to tell them I had failed. As I opened my inbox, a new message appeared. It wasn't from a client. It wasn't from the bank. The sender was SH Trust, Automated Legacy Protocol. I froze. This was the second time. The first had been a breach alert. This one was different. I clicked it open. Subject activation condition met. Denial of aid. The body of the email was cryptic, written in a font that looked like it came from a typewriter. Ms. James, per the surveillance parameters established by the late Vivian Sinclair. Your physical presence was detected at the Kensington estate between the hours of 14 Huzro and 15 Huzros today. Audio analysis of the environment suggests a refusal of financial assistance by the primary trustees. I stared at the screen. Audio analysis. Had my grandmother bugged her own house? I read on. The refusal of aid is the secondary trigger. If you are reading this, you are now authorized to bypass the standard probate channels. Do not look for Noah Vance at the old firm. He is waiting for you at the location attached below. He has the envelope. The password is, they laugh because they do not know. Go now. The activation clause expires in 12 hours. Attached was a map pin. It wasn't an office. It was a coordinates point for a small airfield in New Jersey, 40 minutes from where I was sitting. I closed the laptop. My heart was hammering a rhythm against my ribs that felt like a war drum. I had thought the Noah Vance email from the night before was a glitch or a scam, but this knew where I had been. This knew what they had done to me. I stood up. I grabbed my keys. Grant had told me to kneel. My father had told me I had no backbone. They were right about one thing. The Hallie who had walked into that house was weak. But the Hallie walking out of this motel room, she wasn't looking for a loan anymore. She was looking for a weapon. The airfield meeting with Noah Vance had changed everything. I was no longer fighting with empty pockets. I had the backing of the Sinclair Trust. But money alone does not win court cases. Evidence does. And for that, I needed to turn my grandmother's resources into a weapon. I met Holly Mercer at her office at 4 in the morning on Sunday. The city was asleep, but inside the conference room, the lights were blazing. The air smelled of burnt coffee and ozone. Holly had assembled a war room. She wasn't alone. Sitting at the long glass table were two people who looked like they hadn't slept in a week. "Hallie," Holly said, not looking up from a stack of depositions. "Grab a chair. We have work to do. This is Dr. Eris, a forensic document examiner, and this is Sarah, a forensic accountant who used to hunt money launderers for the Treasury Department." Dr. Eris was a small man with thick glasses and hands that moved with surgical precision. Sarah was terrifyingly intense, typing on a laptop with a speed that made my own coding look sluggish. "Tell her," Holly said. Dr. Eris slid a large monitor toward me. On the screen was a high-resolution scan of the promissory note Grant had submitted to the court, the one that claimed I owed him $2,400,000. "It is a very good fake," Dr. Eris said, his voice soft. "To the naked eye. The signature is perfect, but look here." He zoomed in on the loop of the H in my name. The image became a landscape of ink and paper fibers. "When a person signs their name naturally," Dr. Eris explained, "the pressure varies. You press harder on the downstroke, lighter on the upstroke. The ink absorption reflects that velocity. But look at this." He pointed to a section where the ink was pooled uniformly. "This signature has no velocity," he said. "The pressure is constant from the first letter to the last. No human hand writes with zero variance in pressure. This was not written. It was drawn, or more likely, it was traced using a digital stylus over a light pad, then printed onto aged paper using a high-end architectural plotter." "Can you prove it in court?" I asked. "I can prove it is highly anomalous," Dr. Eris said. "But the real smoking gun isn't the ink. It is the language." Holly tossed a file folder onto the table. "Read the third paragraph of the loan terms." I opened the folder. I read the legal jargon. The borrower acknowledges that the principal sum is drawn from the unallocated reserve of the primary trust, subject to the discretionary revocable beneficiary interest clauses of 1998. I frowned. Revocable beneficiary interest clauses of 1998. "That sounds specific." "It is extremely specific," Holly said. "It is archaic. Nobody uses that phrasing anymore. It was a specific legal structure my firm used to use 30 years ago. Specifically, it was the structure Vivian Sinclair used for her private holding companies." "Grant didn't write this loan agreement," I realized. "He copy-pasted it." "He got lazy," Holly said, a shark-like grin spreading across her face. "He took an old trust document from your grandmother's files, changed the names, changed the dates, and slapped your signature on it. He thought no one would notice the boilerplate text, but he forgot that the 1998 clause references a tax law that was repealed 10 years ago. A real lawyer would never draft a new loan with that language today." "So we have him on forgery," I said, feeling a spark of hope. "We have him on sloppy paperwork." Sarah, the accountant, corrected. She spun her laptop around. "But if you want to bury him, you need to look at the money." Sarah's screen was a complex web of wire transfers and bank routing numbers. It looked like the schematic of a bomb. "Grant claims he wired you the $2,400,000 from an account at First Republic Bank." Sarah said, "Here is the transaction ID he submitted to the court." She pointed to a string of numbers. "I ran a trace on this ID." Sarah continued, "It is a ghost." "A ghost." "The transaction ID follows the correct format," Sarah explained. "But the checksum digit at the end is invalid. It is a mathematical impossibility. It means this transaction never happened. He didn't just forge the loan note, he forged the bank record. He used a PDF editor to alter a statement from a different transfer and change the recipient to you." "But why?" I asked. "Why go to all this trouble if he wants to ruin me? He could just buy my competitors. Why invent a fake debt?" Sarah looked at me. Her expression was grim. "That is the question I asked myself. People don't commit federal wire fraud just to be petty. They do it to hide something. So I looked at where the money was actually supposed to be. She clicked a key. The web on the screen expanded. The document references the Sinclair Unallocated Reserve, Sarah said. That is a sub-fund your grandmother set up. It was supposed to hold about $10 million in liquid assets for estate taxes. Your father and Grant are the trustees. Right, I said. They control it. They controlled it, Sarah corrected. I did some digging into the public filings of the shell companies that feed into that trust. It took me 4 hours to peel back the layers. Cayman Islands, Delaware, South Dakota. She pointed to a red box at the bottom of the screen. The money isn't there. Hallie, the room went silent. What do you mean? I whispered. The $10 million, Sarah said. It is gone, drained, over the last 4 years. Someone has been siphoning cash out of the Sinclair Reserve into a company called Blue Heron Consulting. And guess who the sole signatory of Blue Heron Consulting is? She didn't have to say it. Grant? I said. Grant? Sarah confirmed. He has been stealing from the family trust. He has been embezzling from your grandmother's estate since before she even died. He bought his condo in Aspen with that money. He bought his portfolio positions with that money. The pieces slammed together in my mind with the force of a collision. The audit, I said, realizing it. The IRS mandates an audit of trusts every 5 years. That is coming up next month. Exactly, Holly said, leaning forward. Grant has a $10 million hole in the books. He can't explain where the money went, so he needed a write-off. He needed a bad debt. My mouth fell open. Me? You? Holly said. If he sues you for $2.4 million and forces you into bankruptcy, he can claim that the money he stole was actually a failed investment in your company. He writes it off as a loss. The books balance. The auditors go away. And he gets to look like the victim of a deadbeat sister. I felt sick. It wasn't just hatred. It wasn't just jealousy. It was a cold, calculated human sacrifice. Grant was going to destroy my life, my reputation, and my work, just to cover up the fact that he was a thief. He was using my carcass to patch the hole in his sinking ship. He is not just trying to stop me, I said, my voice shaking with rage. He is trying to frame me for his own crime. And your father knows, Sarah added quietly. He has to. He is the co-trustee. If Grant goes down, your father goes down for negligence or conspiracy. That is why they are all in on this. That is why your mother told you to come back and work for them. They need to keep you close. They need to control the narrative. I stood up and walked to the window. The sun was rising over the city, casting long shadows across the skyscrapers. I thought about the way Grant had looked at me in the solarium. Kneel. He hadn't asked me to kneel because he was powerful. He had asked me to kneel because he was terrified. He was a cornered rat, and I was the only thing standing between him and prison. This is it, I said, turning back to the room. The activation clause. Holly nodded. Vivian knew. She must have suspected they were dipping into the funds. That is why she left the evidence with no advance. She knew that eventually they would need a scapegoat, and she knew it would be you. So what do? I asked. Do we go to the police? Do we call the FBI? Not yet, Holly said. Her eyes were hard as flint. If we go to the police now, they will lawyer up. They will destroy evidence. They will drag this out for years. Blackwater will be dead by the time an indictment comes down. We need to kill this in the courtroom, I said. We need to ambush them, Holly corrected. Tomorrow is the hearing on the permanent injunction. Grant thinks he is walking in there to watch you surrender. He thinks he is going to get a default judgment because you can't pay a lawyer. She tapped the stack of evidence. He doesn't know you have no advance. He doesn't know you have us. And he certainly doesn't know we have this. She held up the forensic report on the signature. We let them present their case, Holly said. We let them lie on the record. We let Grant stand up there and swear under oath that the debt is real. And then we drop the bomb, I finished. We don't just win, Holly said. We end them. But you have to be ready. It is going to be brutal. They are going to say terrible things about you before we get our turn. Can you handle that? I thought about the last 36 years. I thought about the birthdays they forgot. I thought about the way they laughed at my business plan. I thought about the Hallie the Smudge nickname. I looked at the forged signature on the screen. It was an attempt to steal my identity, to steal my name. I am not the one who should be worried, I said. I am done crying for them. I am done asking for permission to exist. I picked up the file. Prepare the motion, I told Holly. We are not asking for a dismissal. We are asking for a counter-inquisition. Sarah typed something into her laptop. I will have the full trace of the Blue Heron accounts ready by 6 in the morning. I can link the withdrawals to the purchase of Grant's car and his country club membership. Good, I said. One more thing, Holly said. She opened her briefcase and pulled out a small, velvet box. Noah Vance sent this over with the files. He said you should wear it to court. I opened the box. Inside was a brooch. It was a diamond starburst, sharp and jagged. It was Vivian's, the same one she was wearing in the video. He said it is a signal, Holly said. When they see it, they will know. I pinned the brooch to my cheap lapel. It was heavy. It felt like armor. Let's go to court, I said. The preparation was done. The trap was set. They wanted a show. They wanted to use the legal system as a stage for their power. Fine. I would give them a performance they would never forget. They thought they were suing a helpless girl who built computer models. They were about to find out that they had declared war on the only person in the family who actually knew how to calculate risk, and their risk exposure was currently 100%. The courtroom was colder than I remembered, or maybe it was just the chill emanating from the plaintiff's table. Grant sat there, radiating a smug confidence that made my teeth ache. He was wearing a navy suit that probably cost more than my car. His hair perfectly coiffed, his posture relaxed. Next to him, my mother was already dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, though the judge hadn't even entered yet. My father was reviewing notes, looking for all the world like a man burdened by the incompetence of his offspring. I sat with Holly Mercer. I kept my head high, my hands folded on the table. The diamond brooch Vivian's starburst was pinned to my lapel, hidden slightly by the fold of my jacket. I wasn't ready to reveal it yet. All rise, the bailiff intoned. Judge Galloway swept in, his black robes billowing. He took his seat, adjusted his glasses, and looked down at us with the weary expression of a man who had seen too many rich families squabble over money. We are here on the matter of Kensington Vi. James, the judge said. Motion for permanent injunction and appointment of a trustee over the assets of Blackwater Risk Analytics. Mr. Sterling, you may proceed. Sterling stood up. He buttoned his jacket with a flourish. Your Honor, Sterling began, his voice dripping with faux concern. We are here today to stop a bleeding wound. My client, Mr. Kensington, generously loaned his sister $2,400,000 to start her business. He did this out of love. He did this out of faith. He gestured to me. But sadly, that faith was misplaced. Ms. James has not only failed to repay a single cent of the principal, but she is now engaging in high-risk financial maneuvering that threatens to evaporate the remaining assets entirely. We have reason to believe she is attempting to move capital offshore to avoid her obligations. We are asking the court to step in, freeze the company accounts permanently, and appoint an independent trustee to liquidate the assets and repay the debt. Liquidation, Judge Galloway asked, raising an eyebrow. That seems extreme for a collection action. It is necessary, Your Honor, Sterling insisted. The company is a shell. It has no real revenue. It is a house of cards that is about to collapse. I felt Holly stiffen beside me. This was the lie. They needed to paint Blackwater as worthless so they could justify seizing it. Ms. Mercer, the judge asked. Turning to us, Holly stood up. She didn't walk to the podium. She stayed at the table. Your Honor, Holly said calmly. The defense denies all allegations. There is no debt. The document is a forgery. And as for the claim that Blackwater is a shell with no revenue, she paused. We would like to submit into evidence the award letter from the Office of National Resilience, dated last week, granting Blackwater a contract valued at $80 million. A ripple of murmurs went through the gallery. Sterling froze. Grant's smile twitched. Judge Galloway picked up the document Holly had slid forward. He read it. Then he looked up, his eyes narrowing. Mr. Sterling, the judge said, you just told me this company has no revenue, yet I am looking at a federal contract that puts it in the top 1% of analytics firms in the country. It is speculative, Your Honor. Sterling stammered. Government contracts are complex. It is not speculative, the judge snapped. I read the industry reports. I saw the mention of Blackwater in the Financial Times yesterday. It strikes me as odd that a company on the verge of collapse is being hired to protect the national power grid. He looked at Grant. Mr. Kensington, are you aware of this contract? Grant stood up. He looked smooth, but I could see the tension in his jaw. I am aware she claims to have one, Your Honor, but that is exactly the problem. She is using my money, stolen money, to prop up these operations. If she defaults on the government, I lose my investment. I am just trying to protect my principal. By shutting her down, the judge asked. That seems counterintuitive. She is unstable, Your Honor. My mother suddenly spoke up from the gallery. Ma'am, please sit down, the bailiff warned. No, let her speak, the judge said. Leaning back, my mother stood, clutching her pearls. My daughter. She has always been difficult. She lives in a fantasy world. She denies reality. We are just trying to help her before she gets into trouble with the federal government. She is not capable of managing this kind of money. It was a perfect performance. The grieving mother, worried about her mentally unstable daughter. I felt a cold rage, but I didn't move. I waited. We have heard enough, Judge Galloway said. I am inclined to maintain the freeze pending a full audit. If there is a dispute about the debt, we need to protect the assets. Grant let out a breath he had been holding. He smiled at me. He had won. The freeze would stay. The contract would die. However, the judge added, picking up his gavel, I want to schedule the audit for... Clack! The sound came from the back of the room. The heavy double doors swung open. Every head turned. A man walked in. Noah Vance. He looked exactly as he had in the airfield hangar, impeccable, ancient, and terrifying. He carried the battered leather briefcase. Who is this? Judge Galloway asked, irritated. This is a closed hearing. I am Noah Vance, the man said, his voice carrying to the rafters. I am the executor of the Sinclair Holdings Trust, and I am here to interrupt these proceedings under the authority of the Activation Clause. Grant's face went white. My father dropped his pen. The Sinclair Trust is closed, Sterling shouted, standing up. Vivian Sinclair died 2 years ago. This man has no standing. The trust is not closed, Noah Vance said, walking past the bar. He placed a thick, sealed envelope on the judge's bench. The black wax seal was unbroken. It was merely sleeping. What is this? The judge asked, looking at the envelope. Evidence, Noah said. Pre-authenticated, notarized, and sealed by Vivian Sinclair herself, to be opened only in the event that a member of the Kensington family attempts to bankrupt Hallie James. The room went deadly silent. Judge Galloway looked at Grant, then at the envelope. He picked up his letter opener. He sliced the seal. He pulled out a flash drive. Play it, the judge ordered the bailiff. Objection. Sterling screamed. This is inadmissible. We don't know the provenance of this. Sit down, counselor, Judge Galloway roared. If this is related to the trust funds in question, it is absolutely admissible. Play it. The screens on the wall flickered, static. Then, the image resolved. It was my grandmother, Vivian Sinclair. She was sitting in her library. She looked frail, but her eyes were burning. She looked directly into the camera. Hello, Grant? Hello, Robert? Hello, Eleanor? Her voice filled the room. It was the voice of a ghost, but it was louder than anyone living. My mother gasped and covered her mouth. Grant looked like he was going to vomit. "If you are watching this," Vivian said on the screen, "it means you have done exactly what I knew you would do. You have gotten greedy. You have gotten desperate, and you have tried to eat your own young." She leaned forward. "You thought I didn't know about the Blue Heron account, didn't you, Grant?" Grant flinched as if he had been slapped. "You thought I didn't see the transfers," Vivian continued. "You thought because I was old. I was blind. But I saw every penny you stole, $10 million, siphoned off to pay for your gambling, your mistresses, and your ego." A gasp went through the gallery. The reporters in the back row started typing furiously. "I could have exposed you then," Vivian said, "but I wanted to give you a chance to be better. I wanted to see if you would fix it, but I knew you wouldn't. I knew that eventually the hole would get too big, and you would need a victim to blame it on." She paused. Her eyes shifted to the lens, as if she were looking at me. "And I knew you would choose Hallie." On the screen, Vivian picked up a stack of papers. "This drive contains the full ledger of the Sinclair Trust," she said. "It contains the IP logs of the transfers to Blue Heron. It contains the proof that the loan you are suing over never existed. The money you claim you lent Hallie. You spent it on a villa in Tuscany 3 years ago." "Turn it off," Grant shouted, standing up. "This is a deepfake. It is AI. It is a lie." "Sit down, Mr. Kensington," the judge yelled. "Bailiff, secure the plaintiff." 2 bailiffs moved toward Grant. He slumped back into his chair, sweating profusely. "There is one more thing," Vivian said on the screen. "Since you have triggered this clause, the ownership structure of the Sinclair Trust changes effective immediately." She smiled. It was a terrifying, beautiful smile. "I hereby strip Robert and Grant Kensington of all trustee powers. I transfer sole control, beneficiary status, and executive authority of the entire Sinclair estate, including the unallocated reserve and the controlling shares of Kensington Global, to the only person in this family who actually knows how to work. Hallie James." The video cut to black. For 10 seconds, no one breathed. Then, Judge Galloway looked up. His face was pale. He looked at the documents Noah Vance had provided. "Mr. Sterling," the judge said, his voice dangerously quiet. "This is a lot of evidence. Bank records, IP logs, notarized affidavits from 2021. He looked at Grant. "Mr. Kensington, you are asking this court to enforce a debt that this evidence suggests is a complete fabrication designed to cover up a $10 million embezzlement scheme." Grant couldn't speak. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. My father was staring at the table, his face gray. My mother was sobbing, but this time it was real. Sterling stammered. "Your Honor, we need a recess. We need to review this." "You don't need a recess," Judge Galloway said, slamming the file shut. "You need a criminal defense attorney." He turned to me. "Ms. James, the temporary restraining order is dissolved immediately. Your accounts are unfrozen. And frankly, I am referring this entire file to the district attorney's office for an investigation into perjury, fraud, and grand larceny." He banged the gavel. "Court is adjourned." The room erupted. Reporters were shouting. My father was trying to pull Grant out of his chair, but Grant was frozen, staring at the blank screen where Vivian had just destroyed him from the grave. I sat there, feeling the adrenaline crash. I looked at Noah Vance. He gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod. I looked at the brooch on my chest. "Thank you, Grandma," I whispered. I stood up. I didn't look at my family. I turned to Holly. "Call the bank," I said. "Tell them to release the payroll, and call Director Reynolds. Tell him we are back in business." The gavel had fallen, but the war was far from over. In the world of high finance, a court ruling is just the first domino. The real destruction happens in the whispers, the headlines, and the sudden silence of phones that used to ring. We walked out of the courtroom into a wall of flashbulbs. The local press had been tipped off likely by Grant's team, expecting a victory lap, but now they smelled blood in the water. Ms. James, is it true your brother forged the loan documents? Mr. Kensington, did you embezzle $10 million from your own grandmother? Is the Sinclair estate really under investigation? Grant pushed through the crowd, his face a mask of pale fury, flanked by Sterling and my father. They didn't speak. They dove into their waiting SUV like criminals fleeing a heist. I didn't run. I stood on the courthouse steps for a moment, letting the cold air hit my face. Holly Mercer was beside me, her phone already glued to her ear. "The freeze is lifted," Holly said, covering the mouthpiece. "But the bank is moving slowly. They are reviewing the order. Bureaucracy is going to eat up another 24 hours we don't have." "Push them," I said. "Threaten to sue them for damages." "I am on it," she said. We got into my car. The silence inside the Honda was heavy. We had won the battle, but the war for Blackwater's survival was still raging. By the time we got back to the office, the news had broken. Kensington heir accused of fraud in family feud. Shock video from grave matriarch accuses grandson of embezzlement. The internet was eating it up. The video of Vivian Sinclair was viral within an hour. Grandma Vivian was trending on Twitter. People loved the drama. They loved the rich eating the rich. But in the boardroom of Kensington Global, the mood was likely apocalyptic. My father's phone started ringing, and then it stopped ringing, in the worst way possible. According to a text I received from an old contact at a hedge fund, two of my father's biggest institutional investors had just called to pause their relationship pending a clarification of the fraud allegations. In finance, pause means goodbye. No one wants to trust their money to a man whose son is being investigated for stealing from his own trust fund. The dominoes were falling fast. But Grant wasn't done. He was cornered, and cornered animals bite. At 2 p.m, a press release went out from a crisis PR firm hired by Grant. Statement from Grant Kensington. The video shown in court is a manipulated context. My sister, Hallie James, has manipulated an elderly woman with dementia into changing her will. This is elder abuse masked as a legal victory. We will be filing countercharges. It was desperate. It was ugly. And for about an hour, it worked. The narrative muddied. Was I the hero? Or was I the manipulator? But then, the internet did what the internet does best. They fact-checked. A user on Reddit dug up the medical records Vivian had included in the data dump Noah Vance provided. A clear, clean bill of mental health from 3 independent neurologists, dated 2 days before the video was recorded. The backlash against Grant was instant and nuclear. He wasn't just a thief now. He was a liar attacking a dead woman's memory. Inside Blackwater. However, the mood was fragile. I walked onto the floor. The office was quiet. Too quiet. 18 people were staring at their screens. But they weren't working. They were reading the news. They were whispering. Leo stood up as I walked in. He looked tired. "Hallie," he said, "is it true about the embezzlement about the freeze?" "The freeze is lifted," I said, my voice projecting to the room. "The court ruled in our favor." "But the contract?" another analyst asked. "Director Reynolds sent an email an hour ago. He is asking for a stability assurance. If we are in the middle of a criminal investigation involving the Kensington family—" She didn't finish the sentence. The implication was clear. The government doesn't like drama. Even if I was the victim, I was radioactive. I looked at them. These were people who had trusted me when I had nothing. They had worked late nights. They had built this with me. I owed them the truth. "Listen to me," I said. "My family is trying to destroy this company. That is a fact. They tried to starve us out. That is a fact. But today, we punched back. We have the evidence. We have the law. And most importantly, we have the work." I walked to the whiteboard and picked up a marker. "The money is coming," I said. "Payroll will be processed by tomorrow morning. I am personally guaranteeing it. If the bank drags its feet, I will sell everything I own to cover it. But right now, the only thing that can kill us is if we stop. If we miss a deadline for Reynolds, they win. If the server goes down, they win. Do not let them win. It wasn't a brave speech. It was a desperate one, but it worked. Shoulders straightened, eyes went back to screens. Leo nodded at me and put his headphones back on. I went into my office and closed the door. My hands were shaking again. Noah Vance was sitting in my guest chair. I hadn't heard him come in. He was like a ghost himself. "You handled them well," Noah said, gesturing to the floor. "I am terrified," I admitted, sitting down heavily. "The bank is stalling. Reynolds is spooked. If I can't show a clean balance sheet by tomorrow, the contract is gone, and without the contract, you are just a small company with a big lawsuit." Noah finished. "Yes." Noah reached into his briefcase. He pulled out a blue folder. It wasn't the thick envelope from the court. It was thinner, marked Addendum B. "Vivian didn't just leave a video. Hallie," Noah said. "She was a businesswoman. She knew that winning in court takes time, and business dies quickly. She knew about the liquidity gap." He slid the folder across the desk. "What is this?" I asked. "Open it." I opened the folder. It was a single sheet of paper, a stock certificate. But it wasn't for Sinclair Holdings. It was for a company called Archimedes Group. I frowned. "I have never heard of this." "You haven't," Noah said, "because it is a private equity firm, a very quiet, very powerful one. It owns significant stakes in logistics, data centers, and wait for it, the bank that currently holds your business accounts." My eyes widened. Vivian owned this. Vivian was Archimedes, Noah corrected. She built it in the 80s. She kept it separate from the Kensington Trust because she didn't want your father touching it. It was her war chest. He pointed to the bottom of the certificate. "This document certifies that in the event of a hostile action against her designated heir, the controlling interest of Archimedes Group transfers to you." I stared at him. "I own the bank." "You own the holding company that owns the bank," Noah said with a rare, dry smile. "Which means you don't have to wait for them to review the court order. You can just call the chairman of the board and tell him to unfreeze your accounts, because you are his boss." I sat back, stunned. The scale of it was staggering. My grandmother hadn't just been a wealthy widow in Greenwich. She had been a titan hiding in plain sight. And my family, my arrogant, pompous family, had been living off the scraps she deigned to feed them through the main trust, completely unaware that the real power was sitting in a wheelchair right next to them. "They didn't know," I whispered. "They saw a frail old woman," Noah said. "They didn't look closer. That was their mistake. They underestimated her, just like they underestimated you." He stood up. "Make the call. Hallie, save your company." I picked up the phone. My hands weren't shaking anymore. I dialed the number Noah gave me for the chairman of the board of First Republic Bank. "This is Hallie James," I said when the executive assistant answered. "I am calling regarding the accounts of Blackwater Risk Analytics, and before you transfer me to legal, please inform Mr. Henderson that the new majority shareholder of Archimedes Group is on the line, and I am not happy with the service I am receiving." 10 minutes later, my computer pinged. "Account status active, balance available." I hit the button for payroll, processing. Then I hit the button for the vendor payments, processing. I opened my email and drafted a message to Director Reynolds. "Director Reynolds, attached is the real-time proof of funds and a letter from our financial institution confirming full liquidity and the dismissal of all freeze orders. We are ready to deploy. Sincerely, Hallie James, CEO." I hit send. I looked out the window at the parking lot. The sun was setting. The dominoes were still falling. But for the first time, they weren't falling on me. They were falling on the people who had pushed them. My phone buzzed. A text from Holly. "Grant just fired Sterling. He is looking for a plea deal lawyer. And your father just resigned from the board of the country club. It is imploding." I didn't smile. It wasn't funny. It was tragic. They had everything. They had money, status, a legacy, and they had thrown it all away because they couldn't stand the idea of me having a piece of it. "You should have just given me the loan," Grant, I whispered to the empty room. It would have been so much cheaper. The counteroffensive did not begin with a shout. It began with the dull, heavy thud of 3 binders hitting the mahogany table in the district attorney's intake office. We were not just defending anymore, we were hunting. Holly Mercer filed our formal response to the initial lawsuit at 9 a.m. on Tuesday. It was a document so dense with forensic proof that it practically radiated heat. We didn't rely on emotional pleas or character references. We relied on the one thing the Kensington family had forgotten existed: absolute, empirical truth. Our submission included the full report from Dr. Aris. We had 60 pages analyzing the ink density of the forged signature. We had the spectral analysis proving the paper stock used for the 4-year-old promissory note had been manufactured only 18 months ago. We had the metadata from the printer, which Leo had managed to trace back to a network device in Grant's home office using the embedded yellow dot pattern that color laser printers leave on every page. But the real knife was the money. Sarah had mapped the financial DNA of the fraud. We laid out the entire flow of funds. We showed the court exactly where the $2,400,000 had supposedly come from a phantom account and where the real money from the Sinclair Trust had actually gone. We tracked the $10 million Grant had siphoned over 5 years. We listed the dates, the times, and the recipients: a luxury car dealership in Miami, a high-stakes gambling syndicate in Macau, a shell company in Panama that paid the rent on a penthouse used by his mistress. It was surgical. It was humiliating. It was public record. Simultaneously, Holly opened a second front in civil court. She filed a suit for defamation, tortious interference with business relations, and abuse of process. "We are not asking for an apology," Holly told the press on the courthouse steps, her voice cutting through the morning traffic noise like a razor. "We are asking for damages. Real, quantifiable damages." I sat in my office, watching the feed. I had instructed Holly to be ruthless with the math. I didn't want them to pay for my tears. I wanted them to pay for my time. We calculated the interest rate on the delayed payroll. We calculated the reputational risk to the federal contract. We calculated the billable hours of my staff who had been distracted by the freeze. We put a price tag on every second of anxiety they had caused. And the final number was staggering. It was a number that would force them to liquidate assets they had spent generations protecting. Noah Vance made the next move. He triggered a secondary provision of the activation clause. He called it the Sunlight Protocol, because the Kensington family had publicly accused the Sinclair Trust of mismanagement to justify their lawsuit. Noah successfully argued that the trust's books were now a matter of public interest. He released a redacted version of the ledger to the financial press. It was a bloodbath. By noon, the headlines weren't just about a family feud, they were about systemic looting. Kensington estate used as piggy bank for prodigal son. The $10 million lie. Grant tried one last, desperate gambit. At 2 p.m, his new legal team, a scrappy, strip mall firm that was clearly a last resort, announced they had a witness. They produced a man named Arthur Pym. He was a retired accountant who had done contract work for my father's firm years ago. Pym signed an affidavit claiming he was present in the room when I signed the loan document 4 years ago. He claimed he saw me take the check. He claimed he heard me thank Grant for saving my career. It was a bold lie. It was almost impressive in its stupidity. We were deposed in a conference room 2 days later. Grant was there, looking like a man who hadn't slept in a week. His skin was gray, his eyes darting around the room. My father sat next to him, silent and rigid as a statue. Arthur Pym sat at the end of the table. He was a nervous man with a wet cough and a suit that was too large for him. "Mr. Pym," Holly said, opening a folder. "You swear under oath that you witnessed Hallie James sign this document on June 12th, 4 years ago, at the Kensington estate in Greenwich." "I do," Pym said, his voice cracking. "I was there for a tax consultation. I remember it clearly." "June 12th," Holly repeated. "A Tuesday." "Yes." Holly didn't look at Pym. She looked at Grant. "Mr. Pym," she said, "do you own a credit card ending in 4492? Pim blinked. Yes, I believe so. And did you own that card 4 years ago? Yes. Holly slid a single sheet of paper across the table. This is your credit card statement from that month, obtained through a subpoena of your financial records during a previous, unrelated bankruptcy filing you made 3 years ago. It is public record. She tapped a line item. On June 12th, 4 years ago, your card was used to pay for a hospital stay. Pim went pale. Specifically, Holly continued, her voice devoid of mercy. It was used at a medical center in San Diego, California, 3,000 miles away from Greenwich. You were undergoing emergency gallbladder surgery, Mr. Pim, unless you have the ability to bilocate or sign legal documents while under general anesthesia on the other side of the continent. You are lying. The silence in the room was absolute. It was the sound of a trap snapping shut. Pim looked at Grant. Grant looked at the table. I might have confused the dates, Pim stammered. You didn't confuse the dates, Holly said. You were paid to be here, and we will find the transfer. Perjury carries a sentence of up to 5 years. Mr. Pim, do you want to spend your retirement in a cell for Grant Kensington? Pim stood up. He was shaking. I am leaving, he said. I am not feeling well. I assert my Fifth Amendment rights. He scrambled out of the room. Grant put his head in his hands. It was over. The last wall of their defense had crumbled into dust. That evening, the call came. It wasn't Grant. It was my mother. Her voice was soft, trembling, stripped of its usual haughty veneer. Hallie, she said, please, we need to talk, not as enemies, as a family. I think we are past that. Mother, I said, putting the phone on speaker so Noah could hear. We were in my office, drinking bad coffee. Your father wants to settle, she said. He wants to end this. Tonight. Please come to the firm. Just hear us out. I looked at Noah. He nodded. I will be there in an hour, I said, and I am bringing my lawyer. Fine, she whispered. Just come. The offices of Kensington Global were usually a hive of activity, but at 8 in the evening, they were a tomb. We walked into the boardroom on the top floor. The view of the Manhattan skyline was breathtaking. $1 billion of real estate glittering in the dark. My parents were there. Grant was not. My father stood by the window. He looked older than I had ever seen him. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a terrified exhaustion. Sit down. Hallie, he said. I sat. Holly sat next to me. We are prepared to make an offer, my father said. He didn't look at me. He looked at the polished wood of the table. We will drop the lawsuit. We will issue a public retraction stating that the document was filed in error due to an administrative mix-up. Grant will step down from the trust. That is not enough, I said. We will offer you a seat, my mother interjected, leaning forward. A seat on the board of Kensington Global and the position of Director of Philanthropy. It comes with a salary of $400,000 a year. You would be one of us again. Hallie, you would have the name, the status. You would be inside. I stared at her. Even now, they didn't get it. They thought the thing I wanted was to be like them. They thought I was fighting for a membership card to their club. You are offering me a job, I asked, in a company that is currently under investigation by the SEC because of your son's theft. You want me to lash myself to a sinking ship. It is not sinking, my father snapped, showing a flash of his old temper. It is a temporary crisis. We can weather this, but we need a united front. If you join the board, if you drop the countersuit, the investigation goes away. We can spin it as a misunderstanding. I don't want to spin it, I said. I want the truth. The truth destroys us all, my father shouted. Don't you understand? If Grant goes down for fraud, the firm loses its license. We lose everything. The house, the reputation, your inheritance. I don't care about the inheritance, I said calmly. I have my own company, and thanks to Grandma, I have Archimedes. I have more money than you do. Dad? The words hung there. He flinched. I am not dropping the suit, I said, and I am not joining your board. I want full payment of damages. I want a public admission of guilt from Grant, and I want him to resign from every position he holds. He is your brother, my mother cried. He tried to kill me, I said. Professionally, financially, he tried to erase me. You don't get to play the family card after you tried to bury the body. My father slammed his hand on the table. You ungrateful little... Robert, my mother warned. No, my father hissed. She needs to know. You think you are so smart. Hallie, you think you are the genius detective. You think Grant is capable of coming up with a scheme this complex on his own. I froze. What? I asked. My father laughed. It was a bitter, broken sound. Grant is a moron, my father said. He couldn't draft a parking ticket, let alone a complex trust loan instrument. Who do you think taught him? Who do you think showed him how to structure the shell companies in Panama so they wouldn't trigger a tax audit? I felt the blood drain from my face. I looked at Holly. She was already writing something down. You? I whispered. Me, my father said, tapping his chest. I built it. I set up the Blue Heron accounts years ago as a contingency fund. Grant just got greedy and started dipping into it too fast. When the hole got too big, I was the one who told him we needed a write-off. I was the one who remembered the old 1998 clause in your grandmother's files. I was the one who told him to use you. The room spun. It wasn't just Grant. It had never been just Grant. My father wasn't protecting his son out of love. He was protecting his accomplice. He was the architect. He had looked at his own daughter, his own flesh and blood, and decided that I was the perfect sacrificial lamb to cover up his own financial crimes. You. I struggled to find the air. You set me up. You told him to sue me. I had to, my father said, his voice dropping to a whisper. If the auditors found the missing money, they would have looked at me. I am the senior trustee. I would have gone to prison. Hallie, I did what I had to do to protect the family. You aren't the family, I said, standing up. My legs felt weak, but my voice was iron. You are the parasite. I looked at Holly. Did you get that? Holly nodded. She tapped her phone, which was lying face down on the table. Recording active, she said. New York is a one-party consent state for audio recording. Thank you for the confession, Mr. Kensington. My father's face went from red to a terrifying shade of white. He realized, too late, that his arrogance had just dug his grave. You set a trap, he whispered. I learned from the best, I said. Grandma Vivian taught me to look for the hidden currents, and you just swam right into the riptide. I walked to the door. I didn't look back at my mother, who was staring at her husband with horror, realizing she was about to lose not just her son, but her husband too. We will see you in court, I said, but this time, I think we will be adding a new defendant. I walked out of the building and into the cool night air. I felt lighter. The final knot had been untied. The mystery was solved. The pain was still there. The knowledge that my father had sold me out was a wound that would never fully heal, but the confusion was gone. I knew who they were now, and more importantly, I knew who I was. I wasn't the victim. I was the cleaner, and I was about to scrub the stain of the Kensington corruption off the face of the earth. The final hearing did not feel like a legal proceeding. It felt like an autopsy. The courtroom was packed. The press gallery was overflowing, spilling out into the hallway, eager to witness the fall of a dynasty. But inside the bar, the air was vacuum-sealed, heavy with the impending destruction of the Kensington name. I sat at the defense table, my hands resting calmly on a leather folder. On my left was Holly Mercer, looking like a gladiator who had already wiped the blood from her sword. On my right was Noah Vance, the silent architect of this entire endgame. Across the aisle, the Kensington side was a study in ruin. Grant sat slumped in his chair. The arrogance that had defined him his entire life, the smirk, the posture, the confident tilt of his chin had evaporated. He looked small. He looked like a child who had broken a vase and was waiting for the belt. My father, Robert, sat next to him, staring straight ahead at the empty jury box, his face a mask of gray stone. He knew that the recording Holly had made in the boardroom had already been turned over to the United States Attorney. He was not just watching his son's trial, he was watching the trailer for his own. Judge Galloway entered. He did not look at the gallery. He looked directly at Grant. "We are back on the record," the judge said. His voice was not loud, but it carried the weight of a falling guillotine. "We have reviewed the forensic evidence submitted by the defense, as well as the supplemental filings regarding the origin of the funds." He picked up a stack of papers. "The findings are disturbing." The judge nodded to the man standing near the jury box. It was not Sterling. Sterling had fled. This was a special investigator from the district attorney's office, brought in once the scale of the fraud became apparent. "Your Honor," the investigator said, adjusting his glasses, "our analysis confirms the defense's claims in their entirety. The promissory note dated 4 years ago is a digital fabrication created less than 18 months ago. The transaction records submitted by Mr. Kensington were altered using commercial photo editing software. The funds he claimed to have loaned to Ms. James were, in fact, traced to a purchase of a vacation property in Tuscany and a series of high-risk transfers to a gambling syndicate in Macau." A murmur rippled through the room. Grant closed his eyes. "Furthermore," the investigator continued, his voice monotone and deadly, "we have uncovered a pattern of systemic embezzlement from the Sinclair Holdings Trust totaling over $10 million over a 5-year period. These withdrawals were concealed through a network of shell companies in Panama, all of which list Grant Kensington as the beneficial owner." The investigator turned a page. "And finally, regarding the bankruptcy petition filed against Blackwater Risk Analytics, we have determined that this filing was made with malicious intent, based on falsified evidence, for the express purpose of seizing control of a federal contractor's assets to cover up the aforementioned theft." The investigator sat down. Judge Galloway took off his glasses. He looked at the defense table. "Mr. Kensington's counsel," the judge said, "do you have anything to say before I issue my ruling?" Grant's new lawyer, a public defender appointed after his expensive team resigned, stood up slowly. He looked defeated before he even spoke. "Your Honor," the lawyer said, "my client is going through a difficult time. This is a family matter that spiraled out of control. It was a misunderstanding between siblings. We ask for leniency. We ask that this be resolved in mediation, not criminal court. Mr. Kensington was under immense pressure to maintain the family legacy." Holly Mercer stood up. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. "Your Honor," Holly said, "this was not a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding is forgetting a birthday. This was a calculated, multi-year conspiracy to frame an innocent woman for a felony she did not commit. They forged documents. They lied to this court. They attempted to destroy a company responsible for national security infrastructure just to hide their own greed. This was not pressure. It was predation." She pointed at Grant. "He didn't do this because he was confused. He did it because he thought he could get away with it. He thought his sister was weak enough to be his scapegoat." Judge Galloway nodded. He picked up his gavel. "I agree with the defense," the judge said. He looked at Grant. "Mr. Kensington, the court finds that the involuntary bankruptcy petition filed against Ms. James is dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, I am issuing a sanctions order against you and your former counsel in the amount of $500,000 for legal fees and costs." The gavel came down. Bang. "However," the judge continued, his voice dropping an octave, "that is the least of your problems. Based on the evidence of perjury, forgery, wire fraud, and grand larceny presented in this courtroom, I am referring this entire matter to the federal prosecutor's office effective immediately." Grant let out a sob. It was a pathetic, wet sound. "Bailiff," the judge said, "take the plaintiff into custody pending his arraignment." The room erupted. 2 marshals moved toward the table, but before they could touch him, Noah Vance stood up. "Your Honor," Noah said, "if I may, One final item for the record. The judge paused. Go ahead, Mr. Vance. Noah walked to the bench. He didn't carry a briefcase this time. He carried a single, small envelope. It was cream-colored, sealed with the black wax of the Sinclair crest. Vivian Sinclair left specific instructions, Noah said. She wrote this letter 2 weeks before she died. She instructed me to give it to Hallie James only after the final gavel fell. But she wanted it read into the record, so there could be no rewriting of history. The judge nodded. Read it. Noah turned to face me. He opened the envelope. His hands were steady. My dearest Hallie, Noah read. The room was so silent you could hear the hum of the lights. If you are hearing this, it means you have won. It means you stood up. I knew you would. I knew it from the day you sat in my library and showed me your business plan. You were the only one of them who understood that value isn't inherited. It is built. Noah paused, his eyes scanning the page. I know you are hurting. I know you wanted them to love you. But you cannot make people love you when they only love themselves. I left you the hard path because I knew the easy path would destroy you. I let you struggle because I needed you to be strong enough to survive this moment. Do not give them a chance to rewrite the story. Hallie, the pen is yours now. The legacy is yours. Build something real. Noah lowered the paper. Signed, Vivian Sinclair. I felt a tear slide down my cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness. It was a tear of release. She had been with me the whole time. Every cold night in the office, every rejection, every moment of doubt she had been watching, waiting, preparing me for the day I would have to stand alone. The marshals moved in. They grabbed Grant's arms. No, Grant shouted, panic finally setting in. Dad, do something, Dad. My father didn't move. He sat frozen, his eyes fixed on the table. He knew that the moment Grant started talking to the feds and Grant would talk the immunity deal would be the only way out. My father was already calculating his own survival, and it didn't include his son. Dad! Grant screamed as the handcuffs clicked shut. The sound was metallic and final. My mother, sitting in the front row, let out a wail and collapsed into her neighbor's arms. It was the first unscripted moment of her life. As they dragged Grant past our table, he looked at me. His eyes were wild, filled with hate and fear. You did this? He spat. You ruined us. I stood up. I walked to the edge of the table. I was 3 feet away from him. I looked at the brother who had told me to kneel. I looked at the father who had set me up. I looked at the mother who had watched it all happen and said nothing. I didn't ruin you, Grant, I said softly. The marshals paused, letting me speak. You ruined yourselves, I said. All I did was turn on the lights, Grant struggled. But the marshals tightened their grip. You are nothing, he screamed. You are just the help. I looked him dead in the eye. You laughed when I asked for help, I said. You told me to beg, so go ahead. Grant, laugh now. He didn't laugh. He was dragged out the side door, his expensive shoes scuffing the floor. A criminal in a bespoke suit. The courtroom began to clear. The judge disappeared into his chambers. I stayed at the table. Noah placed a thick document in front of me. The transfer papers, Noah said. For the Sinclair Trust? And the Archimedes Group? I picked up the pen. It was a heavy fountain pen, the same one Vivian used to use. I felt the weight of it. It was worth billions of dollars. It was the power to shape industries, to build hospitals, to change the skyline. But more than that, it was a shield. I signed my name, Hallie James. The signature was fluid, strong, with no hesitation, no tremor. It is done, Noah said. You are the trustee. Blackwater is safe. The assets are yours. Thank you, Noah, I said. Don't thank me, he replied, closing his briefcase. Thank the woman who knew that the quietest person in the room is usually the one listening the hardest. I walked out of the courthouse. The heavy doors swung open, and the noise of the city rushed in to meet me. The reporters were shouting questions, cameras were flashing, but it all felt distant, like static on a radio channel. I wasn't listening to anymore. I walked past them. I walked past the town car my father was hiding in. I walked past the life I was supposed to want. I stopped at the bottom of the concrete steps. The wind was blowing, crisp and cold, smelling of rain and asphalt. I looked up at the sky. It was a vast, endless gray, the kind of sky that promises a storm, or perhaps the clearing after one. I reached up and touched the diamond brooch on my coat. "I am listening, Grandma," I whispered. "I am building something real." I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the air of a world that finally belonged to me. Then I stepped off the curb, hailed a cab, and went back to work. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to hear where you are tuning in from. So please drop a comment below and share your thoughts on Hallie's journey. If you enjoyed this tale of justice served, please subscribe to the Maya Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button to help us share this story with even more people.